Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shavis, Pedig Vav, Halacha Aleph. We are learning today Daf Mem Dalid. We're starting on Daf Mem Dalid, Amid Aleph, Mamish, on the top of the Amid. We began yesterday on Daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis, quoting a statement from Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov, V'Shem Rabbi Imi, that Akoi, the city of Akoi, has within it a part that is Eretz Yisrael, and it has within it a part that's considered halachically chutz la'aretz. And to prove that point, the Gemara is going to bring two different stories, two different events that happened with Rabbeinu HaKadosh, with Rabbi. And from each story, we see the story implies one Akoi has in it Eretz Yisrael, one Akoi has in it a part that's chutz la'aretz, and that will be the raya that indeed it's part and part. Now, because of the first story that we also have in the Bavli Sanhedrin Daf Hey, we're going to be speaking about the importance of having smicha. We're not talking about the real smicha, but we're going to be speaking about what we call nowadays smicha. We're going to actually be learning inside in Yoredeya, Simin Reish Mem Beis Seif Katan Yud Dalid. We'll be learning the Ramah, and part of the Ramah is based on the Sugya and on the Gemara that we are learning today, which will lead us into the whole concept of one is not allowed to be moira halacha b'fnei rabbi. We'll try to speak a little bit about how big or how limited is that rule that you can't render a halachic ruling in the presence of your Rebbe. We have to define Rebbe. We have to define the presence of your teacher. It doesn't only mean in his mamish presence. Even if you are in the vicinity, you may also not be moira halacha b'fnei rabbi. And that will be all to prove the concept of Akoi is like this, Akoi is like that. Now, we're going to have in the bottom of Daf Mem Dalid, we're going to have a Braisa. It's called the Braisa of Tchumen. It's a very important Braisa. The Braisa will actually detail the borders of Eretz Yisrael as it was the Holy Land in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash. In other words, the parts of Eretz Yisrael that are smaller than the parts that were conquered under Yeshua. But since they were resettled under Ezra, the beauty of that, the power of that is, we're going with the Rambam, that second Kedusha, that is forever, and we have to know the boundaries. A lot of this Braisa, I'm just going to read, and we have people who have the art scroll, people who have the Ois V'Hadar. Every single little border is subject to debate. It's very difficult to learn it without having proper maps. The art scroll does give one general map, and you'll be surprised to see the general boundaries of Eretz Yisrael as they were settled by Oila Bavel. Now, what that will lead us into, and this discussion will continue, God willing, tomorrow, is Ashkelon. And actually, you're going to know that regarding Ashkelon, you have a diversity of opinions. One opinion, which will be the opinion that our Gemara will be following, or at least we will be learning our Gemara according to this approach, that even though Ashkelon, right, which is southwest of Eretz Yisrael, Ashkelon includes in its vicinity Gaza, which we'll learn about clearly tomorrow. That these locations, they were conquered by Olam Mitzrayim, so they were part of Eretz Yisrael during the times of the first Beis HaMikdash. But our approach will be that our Gemara is saying, the Baraisa that we're going to learn today, the Tchumi Eretz Yisrael, Ashkelon was not conquered by Oila Bavel, with a lot of consequences. Number two, there is another opinion that holds, Chevra, that Ashkelon was not even conquered by Oila Mitzrayim. Eloma, Ashkelon is within the borders of the land of Israel that Hashem promised to Avraham Avinu in the Bris Ben Habsarim, or even better, Ashkelon is within the borders that the Torah gives in Parshas Maseh. In Parshas Maseh, the Torah gives the borders of Eretz Yisrael, that according to many opinions, Ashkelon is included in those borders, but it was not even conquered by Olam Mitzrayim. And then you have a third opinion, just to know, that Ashkelon and Aza is Bechlal not part of Eretz Yisrael. It wasn't part of the promise. It didn't go to that part. The promise that Hashem gave to Avraham Avinu, it's not part of the boundaries of Parshas Maseh. It was not conquered by Olam Mitzrayim. It was certainly not settled by Oilei Bavel. That will be interesting. That means it's real, bona fide on all levels, chutz la'aretz. Our Gemara will be following the first option that we mentioned, that not only is Ashkelon included in the boundaries of Parshas Masei, not only is Ashkelon part of the land that Hashem promised to our forefathers, but Ashkelon was actually conquered by Olam Mitzrayim. Elama, Kedusha Rashaina, Kitcha Lashaita, V'loi Kitcha La'asad Lavei. So the Kedusha left Ashkelon, and when we resettled the land, B'chazaka, under the leadership of Ezra, we never resettled Ashkelon, and we didn't resettle Aza, and that will be a basis of a sugya that will continue into Daf Memhei, which we'll learn, God willing, tomorrow. We're going to be learning again about this rabbinic decree that Gush Eretz Ha'amim is Tamei, right? We have this in Bavli and Shabbos, Daf Yud Dalid Amid Beis, in the whole sugya of the Shmoina Asar Davar. And as we explained already yesterday, Bekitzur, that the body parts of a corpse, whether they are of a Yid or Lahavdil of a Goy, they are metama b'mago ubamasa, and a bone even in the size of a so'ira will impart that level of tuma. And since the goyim were not careful where to bury and how to mark their burial places, there's a high possibility, or there's a possibility that a corpse, a burial place, was redesignated for a field, and when people plowed over that area, they broke up and they brought up fragments of the bone that could be laying on the ground, and because of that, the Chachamim made it gazetted that Gush Eretz Ha'amim are metame. All of that will be negeya concerning Ashkelon. In other words, any locality that's not Eretz Yisrael theoretically should be included in this gezeda of Gush Eretz Ha'amim is metame. Actually, there's another detail to that, and that is that around 80 years before the Churban of the second Beis HaMikdash, the Chachamim added to this takana. And they said that even the Avir Eretz Ha'amim, even if you don't touch the ground, even if you are transported in a wagon or in any other medium in which you don't have to touch the ground, the ear of Eretz Ha'amim is also metame midrabanan. And as Tosfos says in Bavli Nazir Daf Nun Dalid Daf Nun Dalid Amid Beis, that takana was simply to disencourage people from leaving the Holy Land, and all of that will be brought back, as we mentioned, to Ashkelon. And we'll see that there is an exception, that even certain cities that were not halachically part of Eretz Yisrael, and they were not imbued with Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, and therefore, Bisman Bayesheni, just as an example, you were not chayiv to give from what grew their Trumas Umaisres. Why? Because it's Chutz La'aretz. Nevertheless, when it comes to these Gezedas Midrabanan of Gush Eretz Ha'amim, it did not apply over there, as we will see in today's stuff. It's going to be fascinating. The whole thing is fascinating. We're mamish learning about Eretz Yisrael and about the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael v'chulei. We have it right away on Mem Dalid, Amid Aleph, on top of the Amid. This will be the first story from Rabbi, and this story will prove that Akoy, I'm not going to say the words Akoy is in Eretz Yisrael, or it's part in Eretz Yisrael, or you can say that Eretz Yisrael is partially in Akoy. It's a city. In it is Eretz Yisrael, and in it is Chutz La'aretz. This story will prove that in it is Eretz Yisrael. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Hava Ba'akoy. And one intro, whenever we are mentioning cities throughout all of these dafim, Akoy, Ashkelon, Aza, lav dafke, that the modern city of Akoy is exactly where the original city was. Mistamet's in the close vicinity. I would even argue that many of the cities that we will be mentioning today in the Braisa of Tchumen might even be in different localities altogether. But let's go that Akoy is more or less in the same place. It doesn't mean that it's mamish the same place. I think this is important to know. I like this map. The map that you're going to put up later, Kevan, will be the map that will be printed inside the art scroll. And we're not there yet. Let's first get to the bottom of the Amid, and it's going to be fascinating to see how different Eretz Yisrael looked then versus the map that you just put up, versus the current parts, small parts of Eretz Yisrael that are currently under, let's say, Jewish control. But let's go. Rabbi Hava Ba'akoy, Chamsoin Achlon Pita Nekiya. Chamsoin means he saw that the people there are eating white bread. And what's wrong with eating white bread? So have a couple of steps. First of all, the mitzias that bread without one pre-washing the kernels, the grains, in water, not doing that step will automatically from it, it's going to look brownish or darkish, and it's going to be coarse. In order to have white bread, pita, nikia, the step of washing the kernels in water is necessary. Now, who cares? So first of all, just to review, that when something that grew from the ground is currently disconnected from the ground, prior to it becoming tamei, it has to become susceptible to becoming tamei. What will make a food item that's currently not mechubed, that's talush, muksher, lekabel tuma, if it became wetted mindfully, willingly, by any one of the 7 halachic liquids, and the mnemonic to remember what are these liquids is yad, shachat, dam. That's the siman. Yud daled is yayin and devash. Shachat is shin is shemen, and ches is cholov, right? And tes is tal, and then dam is dam and mayim. Okay, so avada, water will make something mukshar susceptible to becoming tummy. Now, another thing to remember, that in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, relatively earlier on, people began to undertake to eat chulin betara. The Chachamim made an isur midrabanan to be metame food, even if the food is chulin. It goes without saying that a dough from which challah has to be removed, according to many opinions, making such a dough tamei, even if it's chulin, is asan midoiraisa, because there is chulin in it. But b'chlal, even not taking out the challah part, there is an isur of making food tamei midrabanan. And now, therefore, it was normal that people that subscribe to this way of living, right, chavedim, they purposefully would never make kernels wet. Why would they do that? Even if they know that they are tahar, right? Even if there are no known sources of tuma, if you have this hachlata that you're leaving your food in a state of purity, you take steps to make sure that they don't become tamei. And the most important step is that from the outset, as long as you can prevent the item from becoming even mukhshar lekabel tuma, you would allow that to stay that way. Now, at some point, you're going to need the flour. I want to say something even about kneading flour. When you knead flour in water, it's going to become mukhshar lekabel tuma. But if you knead the flour in mei peiros are not machshir. It's very important. And it was very common for people then, especially if they were living amongst Amei Haaretz, that they would not have a dough made out of flour and water. Amachaya. But that only works if you never wash the kernels. You see, kernels, just to know the mitzias, if you want to wash it, you cannot use mei peiros to wash it. It doesn't work, it's sticky. Mei peiros is perfect for making a dough. Not that I'm the baker, but that's the way it was. So that's the background behind the story. So Rabbi saw people in Akoi that were eating. Now, he didn't see them washing it, but when you see that they're eating pita nekia, Amaloin, Rabbi told him, Ma atun lassen. What did you use to wash it? Guys, lassen means to wash. It doesn't mean to knead. Like I mentioned, kneading the flour can be done with mei peiros. And it was then the standard to prevent a preventative standard was everything was with mei peiros. But it also meant that they never pre-washed it. Mitamol, Rebbe sees there's a chevra here in Akoi that their pita is white. So he says, what are you washing it with? And again, washing it in itself is not sinful. If they would have told Rebbe that we are very careful, we know that it becomes muksher. We only allow people that are tahar. We don't allow amaratzim to touch our bread. That would have been perfectly fine. But what they told him was, Amrulei, this is also Bavli Sanhedrin Dafei, Talmud Echad Balakam. There was a certain Talmud, when he told us the following halacha. What did he say? What were the words that he said? That Mei Beitzim Ein Machshirin. Now, Mei Beitzim could have two meanings if you don't clarify it. Mei Beitzim really means that whether it is the yolk of the egg or the white of the egg, just like mei peiros are not machshir anything to be mekabel tamei, only the 7 liquids of Yad Shach Adam, which does not include the egg, that's the real meaning of mei peiros. What they understood from mei peiros, they understood it because the Talmud did not expound is berachal bitcha aktana what he means. They thought that if you take eggs and you boil the eggs in a pot of water, the water that was used to boil the eggs, they understood that to mean mei peiros. They understood somehow that if water is being recycled, you're using the water now to wash the kernels. But if that water previously was used to wash eggs or to boil eggs, mei peiros, such waters lose their halachic status of waters, and they can't be machshir. That's what they understood from the words mei beitzim ein machshirim. In other words, whether we go with the girsa savra meimar, or whether you take those words out. So they told Rabbi, va'anan sholkin beyin the losin b'mayhen. Prior, we washed the kernels with water, but what waters did we use? First, we boiled eggs. Now we have mei beitzim in their misunderstanding, and now those waters were used. Savrin meimar, because they thought mei shelach shel beitzim, that this statement, which was not wrong in itself, it was not clear enough. It wasn't explained enough. That mei shalik shel beitzim, v'lo yomar ela mei beitzim atzman. Really, what this halacha means, that whatever is in the egg, there's a machlekes here between the Marav Fulda and the Pnei Moshe, whether mei beitzim is referring to the yolk, whether it's referring to the white, whether it's referring to both, it doesn't matter. Whatever part of the mei beitzim that's not machshir is not what they understood. Okay, in other words, the onus of the clarification of this halacha are not on the people that heard the words. That's the rule, that whoever taught the rule is correct, that mei beitzim are not machshir, he has the onus of clarifying exactly what mei beitzim means. Even though you would argue that most people will understand mei beitzim to be the egg. But people could have understood it the way they did understand it. If you remember, we learned this in Babli Sanhedrin, that the Marshal is the one that uses the story to prove that we should call Mesechtes Beitza Mesechtes Beya. Just to know, Beitza is in the holy tongue, an egg. Beya is Aramesh. Some people say that it's more Lashon Nekiya, somehow Meibeim, but some people link the verbalization to this story. And it can go both ways. Okay, anyways, coming back over here.
Here it says Mei Beitzim, it's supposed to be Mei Beyin, you're saying? According to the Marshal?
In other words, what exactly should he have said? The Marshal understands that if he would have said Mei Beyin, they would have understood that it means the egg or the egg white. You have to know the language properly. And Mei Beitzim, even though when I hear Mei Beitzim, every time, remember the story, we had the same thing. Like, come on. Mei beitzim, you what? Just because you cooked eggs in water, the water should lose their status of water? Maybe.
To me, this whole story is a little ridiculous.
No, it's very good.
Sounds like in the entire Eretz Yisrael, they didn't have real bread. Like,
This is
questionable Eretz Yisrael. What about Yerushalmi?
They didn't.
They're making dark bread.
They had dark bread. Yeah.
They have good flour and water.
No, they did not. No.
For 1,000 years.
Or people were very cautious when it was a very close circuit of people. They would have it. Depends who they had in their homes. Makes a lot of sense. That's what I said. That if they would have told the Rabbi, we're careful. If you told the Rabbi, we know that there's a problem with this, but we're very careful. We're not inviting the whole world. Whenever people had an open house, they would have what we would call Mezainis bread, a mamish. Okay, now before we go on, first of all, I want to say one thing, that this whole culture of making sure, to the best of your ability, that the food remains tahar, even making chulin tameh is mutar midoraisa. So this whole culture was only in Eretz Yisrael. In Chutz La'aretz, people did not eat chulin betara. No one was concerned with that. Like the Gabbai is saying, if you wanted then to have a good piece of bread, you would go to Bavel. No, this story is a raya that Akoy is part of Eretz Yisrael, because if it would have been out, it would have been Anish. Now, before we go on, I know that it's already a little bit late, but it's a very, very easy daf. I want to read just a few lines. you know what? A few more lines in the Gemara, then we're going to go into the Shulchan Aruch. So Amar Rav Yaakov bar Idi, even though we have another story that we owe, before we get to the other story, we're going to give a hemshech to this. That Amar Rav Yaakov bar Idi, because of this story, Ma'oisa Shah Gazru Shelo Yehi Talmud Moira Hayra. Now this is important. I just want to add words. He should not be Moira Hayra unless he has authority from his teacher. And this is the basis of the smicha that we give today. Because the real smicha, as we know, has to do, the real smicha, you become a musmach in order for you to be able, let's say, to enact a knesses, is only if, number one, whoever gave you smicha got smicha, and whoever he got smicha from, it goes all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Everyone's smicha is that way today. Number two, that smicha can only be done in the Holy Land, in Eretz Yisrael. And as we know from many stories in the Gemara and from Chazal, how the Romans who are trying to abolish the Sanhedrin, ultimately they succeeded. What they made gezerah is that you cannot give smicha. And there's stories of Tanoim that were mamas moisa nefesh for them. And at some point, there's no more real smicha. Why are we getting smicha today? Because of this din. Talmud should not be moira hayra, and this is important, unless he has authority from his teacher to be moira hayra. This is why we get smicha today. And the main purpose of giving the authority based on the historically is not about whether the Talmud knows the law. That's a pshita. It's about whether the Talmud is able to articulate the law in a way where it's not subject to a misunderstanding. Of course, this includes clear speech. People who can't speak clearly. But even if someone has a clear articulation, this is not about the clarity of the word. This is about this story. That you have to have some sort of understanding that when you just repeat the law, may peiros are not machshirim. What's wrong with that? May beitzim are not machshirim. It was a mistake. He made a mistake. It's a whole different angle. It's not about do you know the din. It's about how clear are you able. You have to assess whoever's listening. You have to know them enough to understand where may they have a misunderstanding. He said nothing wrong. And you have to be very detailed in what you're saying. So what you're saying should not be misunderstood. And that, I just want to read the following. I'm reading Ramah, Yeredeya. By me, it's Chayla Gimel. Depends how you have your Shulchan Aruchs divided. Simen Reish Mem Beis Seif Katan Yudalid in the Ramah Hago Inyan Hasmicha Shono Hago Bezman Hazeh Kedei Sheyedu Kol Ha'am Shegiya Lo Hayra Uma Shemoira Hu Bereshus Rabbi Yasomchay. He writes two things. Number one, like we're saying, how do you know that you know the halacha? So that's the simple thing. You have to know enough. Whoever is giving you smicha has to ascertain that you know enough to be able to paskin on any level. But number two, this is the ikir. Now, as we'll see in the Gemara in a moment, the biggest problem is for a Talmud to be moira halacha b'fnei Rabbi. And once the Rabbi gives you the shus, then you can be moira hayra. And once Danny, the Rabbi, passed away, the Ramah writes, "V'lachin im kvar meis Rabbi ein tzarich l'smichus." How great is that? Yes, that even if it's not an issue of moira hayra b'fnei Rabbi, the misha einoi musmach limoirenu. If someone did not get permission to paskin today smicha, their psak is not a psak. Now let me tell you what that means. If someone asks you, what bracha do you make on coffee? And you say shahak oil, you're not paskining anything. I knew many Rabbanim, Rabbi Reichik of blessed memory, Rabbi Shimon Reichik, I would ask him a shayla, he would barely answer. He would pull out a Shulchan Aruch and show me inside. And he told me that's the way you have to do it. He's not paskining, the Alter Rebbe is paskining. You're not paskining at shahak oil, but there are certain things that are done today that needs a maisa based in. For example, a get. If someone wrote a get kedasu kedin, just like you have dinim of edus, if the edim are relatives, it's not kosher, right? the Beis Din, they have to be, called a Maisa Beis Din. And therefore he writes that the Misha Eino Musmach Lemoideinu, if someone doesn't have smicha, today's smicha to paskin, v'noisen gitten v'chalitzois, Danny, ain't the mass of klum. And that's a very big statement.
But just to be clear, this type of smicha is talking about like after shimush, right?
After smicha, doesn't matter. You can call smicha and shimush, doesn't matter. It's what we call smicha now. But the real smicha,
Smicha now, go do a get.
if you got smicha for gitten. And that's the Ramah. The Ramah writes at the end. The Ramah writes at the end that because of this type of smicha, a person could get smicha on a certain part of halacha. And in the real smicha, it never worked that way. You needed to be fluent in all of the halachas. You didn't get smicha just for git, and that is clear. But look inside the Ramah. This is fascinating. But let's come back to our Gemara here. So there's two things, like we just saw on the Ramah. First of all, you have to get permission because the Rebbe wants to know whether you know how to speak things out in such a way where it won't be subject to a misunderstanding. Aside of you have to know the halacha, that's a given. And then there's another inyan. You can't be moed halacha b'fnei Rabbi unless your Rabbi gave you permission. These are two parts. For the second part, that Amar writes, if your Rabbi passed away, you don't need smicha. For the first thing that we're mentioning, you need to have smicha. Because if you were not given permission to paskin, then how do you know that we don't let you give up psak din? You might be misunderstood. Tani, we learned in a brayso. See, two dinim. Din number two is, so again, I'm sorry, Rabchia b'shem Rav Huna, Talmud shehoida afilu k'halacha afilu k'al, that's the Ramah of a get. You paskin properly, ein hara asay hoida. Why? Because you did not get permission. You cannot create a Maisa Beis Din. A Beis Din is comprised of three dayanim. You have to have smicha for whatever it is that we're making a Beis Din for. Now, aside of that, there's another thing. Tanei, Talmud, Shahoida, Halacha, Lifnei Rabbi, Chayev Misam. And indeed, like we know already, that even though we just read, right, in Parshas Shemini, right, Veikchu b'nei Aaron, we have the Balkaida here. But I'm more or less saying it, not the Varaviyu. Ish Machtasi, Rabbi Brothers putting on tefillin, so if I make a mistake, he can correct me. Someone al chaparain. And it says, state, Vayakrivu lifnei Hashem eish zara. What's the eish zara? All of these chazals. One of the eish zaras was Tani b'shem Rabbi Eliezer, right, in the Yerushalmi on a Aleph. Loi meison alevaviu elo shohoiru b'fnei Moshe Rabban. They paskin before Moshe Rabbeinu. And as we know, right, that there was, since there was a heavenly fire, mamish, there was a miraculous fire on the Mizbeach, and it consumed all of the karbanos. So people were wondering, why do we even have to bring the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim? Or why do we have to add the wood to karbanos? It's being burnt anyways. So Nadav and Avihu says, no, even though there's fire from the heavens, mitzvah lohavim in a head yet, you have to bring a earthly fire. And why did the Torah call it Eish Zara? Because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't yet say you have to do it, even though what they said was correct. Prior to the Rav paskening that you have to bring mitzvah lohavim in a hediyot, that fire is called an Eish Zara. Furthermore, the Gemara says, Ma'aseh b'Talmud echad, shoyre lifnei Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi, he paskened. So Rabbi Eliezer went home. Rabbi Eliezer's wife, her name was Ima Shalom. Mama Shalom. Amale Ima Shalom, who was his wife, Ishtoi. My Talmud won't live the week. He's passing away this week. It wasn't that he was cursing him. He just knew because of what he did that he's not going to live the week. And indeed, v'lo yotza Shabbatoi yat shemeis. Amar lo Talmidov. So this Talmidim told Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi, Navi Atom, are you a Navi? You know, this is a Chassidish accusation. Like, who are you? Amar lohem, loy Navi Yonoichi. V'loy ben Navi Yonoichi. He was quoting the words of Amos Hanavi. Elakach ani mekubal. Shekol Talmud hamoid halacha b'fnei Rabbi is chayev misam. Gevaldik. Tani we learned in a brayso. Also the Talmud lohoid is halacha b'fnei Rabbi. Now what does it mean b'fnei Rabbi? That's another thing. That means b'fnei Rabbi doesn't mean not only not in his presence. It means you have to be far away. Achi yehi rachek mimenu shnei maser mil. Why Shnei Maser Mil? Because that was the size of the encampment of our grandparents in the Midbar. Kemachne Yisrael. Umatam, how do you know that it was 12 mil? Because since it says in Parshas Masei, Vayachnu ala Yarden, And the Torah gives you where we were. We were from the place called Beis Hayeshimois ad Avalashitim, and they knew in the times of the Yerushalmi, they knew exactly the location, and they went and they measured it. The Kamaheng, that locality was Shnei Masar Mil, otherwise known as 3 parsa by 3 parsa. This is really great. Now, I want to just apply this nowadays. In other words, Danny, who was the Rav over there? Moshe Rabbeinu. So if you had a Shaila, you have to go to Moshe Rabbeinu. But since everyone was within 12, the farthest away was the 12 mil, so if the Rebbe is beyond 12 mil, then you can paskin if you know the halacha, and if you speak clearly, and if you know how to explain things properly. The question is nowadays we have, during the week, we have communication. Now a telephone is even better than the next door because you pick up the phone. Same idea. And B'chlal, it's wiser not to take the position of paskening dinim. When you have in your city, when you have rabbanim that are poiski dinim. What we should do is that if someone asks us a shayla, we should tell that person where the halach is written already. Most of the dinim that we are doing today is not called a psak din. You're not being, like I mentioned, if someone asks you the bracha on a cup of water, you're not being moida halacha. That halacha was already paskened. Masha'enkin, writing a get, you're doing a Maisa Bezin. That's a whole different thing. And Kadom, furthermore, Rabtanchaim Barchia, Haba in a city called Chefer, and Vahaba Sha'alan, and people there would ask him Shailes, V'humoida, and he would paskin Sha'alam lei, V'humoida, and it was a common occurrence. In lei, someone told him, Rebbe, Rabtanchum, did you not teach us that watch unless his Rebbe is far away from him, at least the 12 mil Kamachne Yisrael, and therefore, what's the issue? The issue is that Rav Tamchain Barchia's teacher is Rabbi Mana. Rav Mana then lived in Sipoiden, and Sipoiden was within 12 mil. So to which Rav Tamchain responded, Amaloin Yesei Alai de lo Yadis. May something bad happen to me if I'm lying when I'm saying I did not know. In other words, I did not know. And indeed, now that he knew, then he shata loy oirei. And let me just tie this back up with the Ramah. What does this imply? Danny, this implies that whatever he paskent in the past stands. See, there's two dinim here. If you don't have smicha, then there is a din that your psak is not a psak. And that's retroactive. There used to be a Rav that lived in LA, maybe he still lives here, that many years ago, the Rabbanut of Eretz Yisrael and other Bati Dinim in Eretz Yisrael wrote to all of the local Rabbanim that person's gittin are not gittin retroactively. There's no Maisa Beis Din. Mamish. And the Gerus is not a Gerus. Here, in his story, that's because that person is not qualified for whatever reason. They were not given permission. Here, the issue was not about permission. Here, the issue is that it's bifnei Rabbi. If the issue is bifnei Rabbi, mitzad echad yechayiv misa, he passed away, that Talmud. Mitzad sheni, you only chayiv misa if you knew. If you didn't know, so you say, I didn't know, but mikan olahab, I'm not going to paskin anymore bifnei Rabbi. Let's go right. Now we have to come back to the second story. Now we're getting late. So all of that is a proof that they had an issue with making kernels mukhshar because it must be Akoy is in Eretz Yisrael. However, Rebbe wants another story. Rebbe was an Akoy and Chamachar Banash, and he saw a person, Salak min Cave Sa'uliel, that he was going up from the rock, wherever the rock is over there, to higher grounds. And what's the issue? The issue is the higher grounds was an Akoy. And as we mentioned in our words of introduction, and as we quoted yesterday, that Bavli Shabbos Daf Yudalad Amid Beis, that the Chachamim were made a decree that Gush Eretz Amim is Metame. And so Rebbe told him, now this whole story is predicated on this person's going into halachic Eretz Amim. And all of that was in Akoy. So Amalei, so Rebbe told him, how can you even go there? You're a Kohen. Leis at berei the plan kahana. I don't know you. I know who your father is. Isn't your father a kohen? You're not the son of so and so, and isn't the father lehavi avuch kohen? So how can you go up there? So Amalei, to which he responded that unfortunately, einav shel abba hoyu gavoyos. My father raised his eyes. That's an expression of him looking at a woman, him marrying a woman that she was a gerusha that he was not allowed to marry. He did that because his eyes were gavoyos. And what happens is that interestingly, the kohen himself is only a chalal while he's married to her. right? He's not mischalel. That means that when he divorces her, as he should, he goes back to a state of kahuna. But unfortunately, the child or the children that are born from this prohibited union, they are essentially chalalim, meaning that he was a v'chilel es oisoi ish in reference to himself. In other words, he doesn't enjoy the privileges of a kohen, the chalal, but the chalal is not subject to the restrictions of a kohen, and therefore I'm allowed to go there. So what's the raya? The raya is that in Akoi there was a place that's chutz la'aretz. There was a place that indeed was subject to the gezerah of Gush Eretz Ha'abim, and whoever went there became. By the way, Danny, this is a tumah of 7 days. This is a tumah midrabanan of tumas meis. It's not tumah you go to the mikvah. This is a tumah for which you need to have azos mechatos for a person to be able to re-enter the state of taharam. All right, atkan akoy. We're going to have at the end of today's daf Ashkelon, and sandwich in between is a lengthy brisa. Kevin, if you can put up the picture in art school, that would be great. I'm going to read Ashrei because it's fascinating. But every single line, it can take a person who understands the borders. It's a pity that we don't have Ido with us, people that were Yakir. Every word is fascinating. The map for sure is going from the north to the south. There's no doubt. Another thing about this map, I know that when we began the sugya, and I was using that, we showed a picture here on Zoom from Rabbi Evan Yisrael's picture in Hilchos Trumos, Perek Aleph, halacha in the beginning, halacha Hey Vav. He understood from what we already learned that all the way from the north, all the way to the south, was not settled by Oila Bavel, according to the map that we are going to look at, or for people who have a map. No, it's not the map. None of the coastal cities were settled by Oila Bavel. And I think it would make sense. We live in LA. It's very high. It's very expensive, the land by the water. Could be the Persians kept that for themselves. It wasn't that Jews did not live there. He didn't live mistama everywhere, but it wasn't given over to us that we should sort of say settle it and we should manage it. It wasn't a Jewish city. We already learned about that a few masechtas ago in Kazaria. Right. Remember that whole topic about Kilayim, about Kilei Zeroyim. But let's read the words. So these guys were reading our words in the Braisa. Tchumei Eretz Yisrael. And what Tchumen we're speaking about, again, there's Tchumen of Parshas Masei, there's Tchumen of Oila Mitzrayim. This Braisa is speaking about the Tchumen of Oila Bavel. Kol shechzik Oila Bavel. I wish you can see a map over here. It will be so helpful. I'm going to put up a picture later. You could, Danny, put a picture up because first of all, the width of Eretz Yisrael was mamish double of today. More than double. I'm looking at the northern part of Eretz Yisrael. Our map went all the way up to the Litani River, and I want you to know that the first words in the Braisa, Parashas Choimas, according to some, is the Litani River. People know about the Litani River because of the current conflict, Tafshin Pei, where we're demanding for our enemies to be north of the Litani River. But it's quite amazing. But if you want to look at the width, today, Baruch Hashem, we settled the Golan Heights, which is Taka Eretz Oig Malach Habashan, the land of Oig. But it goes so...
The map there?
Huh? The map is there. Look how great it... And if whoever can take a look, whoever's on the Zoom, you'll see that on the entire western border of Eretz Yisrael, the white strip means that Jews did not officially settle there. That fits to what we learned in our Mishnah. That's why he did it. So I'm going to read off the words. Anyways, we are going... the territories all from the north, and look how it goes all the way to the south. Look at Cheshbon. Look at the country that, in other words, the whole Jordan, that's the whole Ever LaYarden, we resettled there. We went until the nation of Ammon. That's why we learned yesterday that Ammon, Moav, and Edom, if you take a look all the way to the southeast, that's according to one opinion, the three lands that we never got yet, that we're going to get with Mashiach Tzidkenu. It's fascinating. Look how big Eretz Yisrael is. And that's not even as big as it was Ba'olam Mitzrayim. What we have today is a sliver of the promised land, literally. So coming back over here. Parashas Choimas, Migdal Shid, Shino Deroir, Shura da Akoi, Ukitzra de Galila, Vichivrasa, Ubeizinsa, Vikuvayasa, Umilsa de Chir, Uburia Rabasai, Tafnis, Sanpata, Macharta de Yater, Mamsri de Avasa, Veroish me Gatoin, Begatoin Atzmai, Umarcheshe, I skipped, Umeisfar, Umarcheshes, Umigdal Chorev, Ulam Rapsa, Venuksa de Ion, Vesukras, and Keracharaba de Var Sangira, Vitargoy.
Cities that was conquered?
Yeah.
Or he's giving us a border?
Is giving us all of the cities in the surrounding of the map that you're seeing to know all of the borders around. We're not going to the cities inside. Elama, when you come, look at the northern border. For whoever's looking at the map, it's not a straight line. So he has to go up and down. You have to draw city to city, and then you're going to have the whole inside of this entire line, you'll have the oil bubble territory. It's fascinating. V'targoyla ilah, l'mayla min keisarim. V'tarachoyna de machatam levoitzra, u'malach de zarbai, v'nimnin, u'veisevel, u'knos, u'refiach de chagra. Where's Yakir when we need him? I'm sure he knows some of these places. V'derach hagadoyla ayolechas lamidbar. Cheshbon, v'yapka, v'nachla de zeret, v'yigar suadusa. Right, v'yigar suadusa we know from the Chumash. That's where Yaakov and Lavan made a pact. How great is that? V'rekem de goya. And the final one is, and the gardens of Ashkelon, Viganya da Ashkelon, and that's the Nakuda. The fact, that's the end of the Braisa. The fact that the Braisa says that the gardens of Ashkelon were part of the oil bubble territory implies that Ashkelon itself was outside of it. As we mentioned in our words of introduction, and the Gemara does it in the oifen of Akash and a teretz. Ashkelon Atzma, question mark. What do you mean Ganya? What about Ashkelon itself? And indeed. So here we go. Now we're going to have a whole discussion about this, and this is going to continue tomorrow. But let's chaparan as much as we could. So Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha b'shem Seira, min man de tone. No, the fact that this brayso and this we're talking now about the western southern border, and I want you to know the western because whoever is looking at this map, it goes south much further than Ashkelon. But when we're speaking about near the Mediterranean, not on the Mediterranean, according to this map, none of them were settled by Oil Bavel. Minman de Tane, that Ganya the Ashkelon, that implies Hada Amra, Ashkelon itself is Kalachutz. Let's go with the Shita. Yes, it was conquered by Oil Mitzrayim. Vadai, it's included in the territories of Parshas Masei, part of the land that Hashem promised to Avraham Avinu. And I want you to know, going into tomorrow, that Ashkelon and its vicinities also includes Aza. So let's go weiter. Rab Simen bar Chilfai, he taught in a Braisa, and we're going to go with the Girsa that Rebbe, three Tanoim, Rebbe, number one. Number two, Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi. And number three, Ben HaKapar. Now, Ben HaKapar can be Bar Kapara. Ben HaKapar, who says the Marafulda says it's Rab Lazar HaKapar. We're going to use the words of the Braisa. So these three Tanoim, or Ben HaKapar. Nimnu, that what? Al Ashkelon. Now, the words Avid are extremely important because it's possible, Chavra Haltkop, that we mentioned there were two Gezedas, right, Rabbi Mendel? Gezeda number one is in the earlier Bezman Bayesheni, Gush Eretz Amim Amatamim, Beis HaPras, one of the types of Beis HaPras, Tumas Hames, Midrabana. 80 years before Churban Bayesheni, they made another Gezeda. Avid Eretz Amim. And it could be that this is about Avid Eretz Amim. Because at Shayach, there is an approach that says Ashkelon. Ashkelon is Chutz La'aretz. Gush Eretz Amim Metame. Avid, not Metame. Or, you take out the word Avid. That's a very important, this question of the Girsa. And no, we're speaking about the land itself. If a Jew walked into Ashkelon, were they Tameh? Now, hold on. If Ashkelon is Chutz La'aretz, why would they not be Tameh? And the answer is that it's possible, that will be the neshama of everything we're going into. It's possible that even though Ashkelon in the times of the second bias, the oil bubble territory did not include Ashkelon. The Chachamim were the ones that made the Gezed of Gush Eretz Amim. They made modifications. Heim Amru, Beheim Amru. So they said regarding Nimnu, they convened and they paskelined out either on just the Avir or even on the Gush, that what? V'taharu, it's not part of Gush Eretz Amim. Why did they do that? Mipi Rav Pinchas ben Yair. They did it. Mipi means he said something. What did he say? He said testimony. He said, "Sha'ol Yordim Ayinu l'Sitki shel Ashkelon." Sitki means a shuk of Yishmaelim. They would go down over there. What would they go to that shuk for? Lokhin chitim, and they would buy wheat, and they would go back to our city. And what did they do? What did the Yidden who went to Ashkelon to buy these wheat from the Goyim? What did they do? All they did was they went to the mikvah. Now, why did they go to the mikvah? So we don't have enough time, but for those of us who remember, so there's tsinoiros. Tsinoiros means the urine of a goy, even the spittle. If I touch it, I become tummy only on the level that I need to go to the mikvah, and I'm tahar. If the tumah would have been a tumah of Beis HaPras, I would have to have 7 days with Azos Mechatos. So, and the Chanami, they went to the mikvah. Pinchas ben Yair was a kohen. So he says, we went there. All we need to do is we went to the mikvah, and then we were good. But we didn't have to wait the whole 7 days. So what does that mean, guys? If they were not Tomei, Rabbi Mendel, what does that mean? That would mean that it's Eretz Yisrael. There's no Tumas Eretz Amim. But Lamachar, when they convened, they said that whatever grows in Ashkelon is spotted from Isis. You know why it's spotted from Isis? Because it's not part of Eretz Yisrael. So that was the problem. So, okay, we'll stop. I know it's a Gavaldik, we have to stop over here. Bottom line will be is that it fits. You know why it fits? Because Gush Eretz Amim or Avid Eretz Amim is only Midrabanan. So the Chachamim had the right to say that the Chachamim did not imply it. That in Ashkelon we knew where people, everyone, even the Goyim, we knew where all the cemeteries were. Enough Jews knew where everything is. We can rely. But when it comes to Trumas U'Maisers, that's Midairaisa. It's Chutz La'aretz. All of this will actually prove that Ashkelon